Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So a question was asked, and a person kind of asked me to speak on this with the marriages, right? Um, they asked me, out of the marriages that I'm involved in and some of the people I talk to, what's the main component, like for the marriages that's falling apart, marriages that people, I think they said people that they really want them, but they can't keep them together. Like they really want to be in it, but they can't keep them together. What's the main component that I see? And they asked me, was it finances? Was finances one of them? And they kind of asked me to speak about it. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to be honest about this. Even including myself, in times when I've been married, right? Communication. Communication be the biggest issue in marriages that people want, and they fall apart. And marriages with potential, and they fall apart. But with the communication, it's twofold. One, the way they talk to each other. Like, they may be playful and they may crack jokes on each other. But every once in a while, the jokes that they say be hurtful. And sometimes they can't let it go. You know, Shaitan a step in and, whisper, and they'll hold on to it. Excuse me. And they'll hold on to it. Or when they get into an argument and they say things that they don't mean, but they try to be hurtful. And they say things to one another that it just lingers. Like they never let it go. No one wants to be the one to apologize. No one wants to be the one to make things right when they're in the wrong, or even when they're not in the wrong. Just trying to create some peace. So on that end. And then on the other end is when the communication stops, where there's moments of silence. And see, sometimes, and this is my own saying, this is my own thought, sometimes silence kills clarity, because people will start to fill in the blanks themselves, right? And sometimes we'll judge issues based off of observation, and then sometimes we don't see enough of the story, right? We might try to put together bits and pieces of things we've seen and things that we heard that the other person said. But at the end of the day, it's still us painting our own picture. Creating our own narrative. And sometimes we be right. Sometimes we be more right than wrong, but we don't be accurate. We be in the ballpark, but sometimes we don't be accurate. So silence kills the clarity, right? So you would be amazed that sometimes all it took was one conversation. That's it. I done seen marriages crumble. I done seen marriages completely end when all it took was one conversation. One conversation. And see, in this day and time, I'm starting to see where people use silence as a punishment. Right? Sometimes people use silence because they want their presence to be felt. Right? So it's a dangerous situation, because I'm telling you, man, a lot of times I done seen, even I learned to communicate from the hood, being a youngin', because I came from a generation, like I said, I had a lot of uncles. I grew up around men, and different type of men in the streets, athletes, business people, and I used to always say, real men talk things out. So like growing up in the hood, I seen people fight, really trying to hurt each other. And then maybe an older person who knew them and didn't like that they was fighting, somebody intervened. And when these people sat down and had a conversation, one conversation, communicated one time, they didn't even know what they was fighting for. They was fighting in somebody else's business. Somebody put a battery in his back and sent him off, and he wasn't going for it, and then they end up fighting. One conversation turned enemies that was enemies for no reasons into best friends. I've seen people who did harmful things to people, and then later on, when they had a chance to communicate, or once things was communicated properly, those type of things never should have happened. You see? And I've seen marriages go through some serious circumstances that could have been resolved in one conversation. Now, so like in the video, I think it was the sabotaging our own marriages, where I was speaking on the three main components. Like when it's a marriage that's fixable, that can work, and when it's the woman who's the problem, I named the three main things I seen from the female side. And then from the male perspective, when it's the male fault, the three main things I seen from their side. And these is marriages that's fixable. Like there's really no real issues there, but the marriages have a lot of shaky ground and a lot of turmoil. So when I'm naming those things, there's other reasons, there's different stuff, but those are the main things that I've come across, right? So I add into that just overall communication. Because like sometimes what happens is, sometimes people can't understand emotions. Some people so out of touch with how they really feel, or with real feelings. When real feelings get involved, they don't know how to deal with them. Some people don't know how to process it, because some people growing up, they was never loved properly. So like when I was younger, I really knew females that identified love from a man with physical abuse. If he's not fighting you, if he's not beating you up, if he's not standing outside your door popping up on you, then he's not in love with you. And see, a lot of times some of these women will stand in these type of situations because to them, that was love. This is him expressing his love, because they identify acting a fool out of two things, either out of jealousy or out of love. I done seen women be jealous over men that they didn't even want. So out of jealousy or out of love. And these are things, so they identify love through a man. So some people, they just can't process real feelings. So I'm saying that to say, I come from a time, and like a lot of us, if you think back, it was a time, if you think back to maybe elementary school, middle school, and possibly high school, the natural chemistry between male and female, they would come together and genuinely like each other. And then because they genuinely liked each other for who they were, their relationship and friendships just clicked. Just like male and female, people who they become friends with, and because they become best friends with, there be a general interest where they become friends. So some of the relationships that I see that work the best be people who genuinely met each other and liked each other. She wasn't after him for what he had. She didn't want to use him. She liked him. He wasn't after her for what she had. Like, she may have a better home, things that she had that he could benefit from. They naturally liked each other. Those relationships flourish when both parties can handle their emotions. Keep in mind, follow me, because this is finna show communication. I'm speaking on how breakdowns in communications ruin this. So then when you're starting to see relationships of benefit, she's with him, she was never attracted to him. He was just somebody she felt like she could get something from. He was never attracted to her. She had a reputation in the streets for being easy. And then they may have just came around and somehow they both wooed their way into each other's life. But she's there to use him and he's there to get sex. And a baby may come out of it. So you seeing these dynamics where people not just bumping into each other and they like each other. Sometimes it's in Islam, sometimes it's like I got a sister, man, you might be interested in her. Another sister, I know a brother, you might be interested in him. So they just start putting out pieces of the puzzle for each other to grasp, but it's generally, how am I going to benefit out of this? You know what I'm saying? Like, even me, somebody may present a sister to me, and my head is going to be like, how do I go into this without getting taken advantage of? Because we have certain responsibilities. How does this happen? How do I go into this? And then they going to look at, well, how much you make? Can you buy this? So people start to look for that stuff before the natural attraction. The attraction to start to come in a marriage. And then they may go off a couple of appearances where, okay, they look decent enough for me to, will and deal with. So my point is, a lot of those type of situations, they be shaky. So once the communication break down, it's difficult for them to keep it together. And like I said, those two dynamics, either the way that they talk to each other, when they get upset they say hurtful things, or when they joking and playing around, they joke and say something that stings, and sometimes people don't let it go. And if it's tick for tackish, now you cracked a joke and hurt my feelings. So they're waiting for their chance to crack a joke and hurt your feelings back. And then the communication breaks down. or the silent treatment. And marriages be crumbling, or during silence, people will do things that they can't take back. And that's what my point in explaining the relationships is, because when they two people, they just liked each other. They seen each other, they liked each other. She didn't want to use him, he didn't want to use her. They liked each other. And then they came together and they just generally, so when that happens, the love comes quicker. They don't have to grow to love each other. They like how each other look, right? They just click on all cylinders. As long as they stay from those bad habits of playing too much or silent treatments. So when these individuals start to feel for each other, this is still the communication thing. Once they go silent, that love that they have for each other, they put themselves in a position to where they want to start transferring. Not necessarily transferring the love that they have for the other person, and now that they silent, and now that something is going on where they may have some distance between them, because sometimes these relationships might be a little long distance. They might be in different cities, right? So the love that they have, they start transferring it into another person because they want to. They're trying to figure out how to receive that same love back. They want to feel. Some people will refer to it as wanting attention. A lot of times it's referred to as an attention, and some people may refer to it as affection. But in reality, they want what they have with the person that the communication process is broke down. So they may start to talk to other people on the internet. You know, they wanting comfort. They're wanting that feeling back. They may jump into new situationships or entertain other things that they generally wouldn't have had. But all of this happened. And I'm telling you, I've seen this happen numerous of times now as a Muslim and back in the day, because they let the communication break down and then they both start transferring. Sometimes things went too far. Both of them went and did things that went too far, and then sometimes they didn't. But they may have stepped to the line. But not because they was genuinely wanting other people, because they were still wanting each other. And they needed to do something with those feelings. And all of it happened because one conversation wasn't had, man. One conversation wasn't had. I've seen people lose their marriages and then for some reason 4 or 5 years be done past. And they happen to come across each other and finally had that one conversation. And then they had one conversation and realized we threw it all away. Because we stopped communicating. We threw it all away. Because we stopped communicating. I made mistakes because we wasn't talking. Yes, sir. I made a mistake because we wasn't talking. Him. I made some mistakes because we wasn't talking. And the reason why we wasn't talking, because we didn't have a conversation about why we felt some type of way. And I'm saying in the situation that I'm talking about, which was one of the saddest situations I've seen, where a beautiful marriage came apart because he didn't hug his wife one day before he left for work. And this was like a routine. So because he didn't hug his wife before he went to work, his pattern is off. It wasn't because he was in a rush, he was running late and in a hurry to get out the door. That meant some woman at work had his attention. She's going, what did I do wrong? Why is he mad at me? Things change. All because he didn't hug her one day before he went out the door to work. And her mind went through a thing. She accused him of all this little stuff. And it could have been more. But what it boiled down to was, these was two people who just met. And they just liked each other. She wasn't after what she can get out from him. She wasn't trying to get taken care of. He wasn't using her for whatever, this and that. They liked each other and they clicked. But she wasn't used to that. So her emotions she was overwhelmed with her emotions. And she spiraled over a hug. You know, it was a sad thing. And then once she spiraled, due to the situation, they end up like literally just end up not being in the same house. And without them being in the same house, you know, it was sad, man. You know, he made other decisions. He went in, you know, got another wife. And now she really couldn't handle that, because this confirmed the suspicions that she had, when her suspicions came from nowhere. He wasn't looking and thinking to go get another wife. But she left that man in a situation where he needed to transfer. You know what I'm saying? I need to try to figure out how to get back what I'm feeling. And sometimes we look for it in other people and it just doesn't work. So we look for it in another person, look for it in another person, look for it in another person. And sometimes we never find it, man. So all of that to say, man, even if you have a relationship, man, that's a little rocky and it's a little shaky, find a place of peace, man, and start communicating. And don't communicate out of manipulation. And people who in a good situation, don't let your communication process break down. And stay away from the bad forms of communication. When y'all get upset, y'all say hurtful things. And some people can't get over that. Or y'all joking around, you know, cracking jokes about people hair, people weight, you know, how people eat. Just little stuff, jokes that people do, you know. Just be careful with those forms of communication. I've seen people fall into dark places in their marriages based off of that. I've seen marriages where literally like where two people in a house and a whole year, 2 years, 3 years, they don't share the same room. They haven't touched each other. They haven't hugged. The only time they conversate is when it's something that they can't avoid talking about, like something involving some bills, something from the grocery store, you know, little stuff like that. But other than that, no talking, no touching, you know. I was talking to a Muslim this morning, man, about one of the guys I know. He not Muslim. He feel like he's a Hebrew Israelite, right? But he's a friend of the family. And like I'm one of the family members that he can talk to openly. And this man told me that he hasn't had any physical contact with his wife in over 10 years. Some people who touching and loving and all that, they can't even make it to 10 years. And he done been with his wife and they haven't had any physical intimacies in over 10 years. And some of this stuff, it be boiling down to a breakdown in the communication. There's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And he still go above and beyond his responsibilities as a man. Okay? Well, I tell him, hey man, you're a better man than me, bro. You're a better man than me. 10 years. I know Muslims, man, who, you know, they done hit dark places, man, and sometimes it's due to joke cracking, people over analyzing and filling in the blanks because silence has killed the clarity, and then their marriages fall into dark places and they can't find their way out of them. So like I say, man, communication, either too much bad communication or no communicating at all. Yeah. You know, and I've been in those situations, man. Because I've always been a relationship person. I've seen some people. We met at work. They wasn't looking for somebody to use. I wasn't up to no good. We just seen each other. We had a couple of conversations and genuinely liked each other. You see? And then from there, it just blossomed. You see what I'm saying? But sometimes people can't handle those type of relationships or dealing with them type of emotions because it's new for them. So sometimes the relationship becomes bigger than the couple. I'm saying that because it becomes too big to carry, too much to handle. So some people have dropped their side of it, you know. And like I say, talking to a lot of Muslim women and family members, and women probably can attest to this. They say sometimes women ignore the man that they love. At some point, they're going to ignore them if they get so overwhelmed, because they're going to have to go somewhere and regroup and figure out how to get their feelings together, because their heart can't handle it. They start getting fear. They start getting nervous. They start having anxiety. You know, they get around the man and they feel nervous, and you know, so they might get to a point, man, where they ignore the person that they love, because they starting to feel like they losing a part of themselves. And this can happen in a marriage, you know. And then the communication breaks down. You know, I had one sister, wallahi, she wasn't Muslim, but this was like, I was Muslim, but I was listening to them talk, because you know they was just telling me about how they feel, man, and they were saying that all the men that they didn't want was the men that they had sex with. But the men that they liked, that liked them back, they was too scared to have sex or be in a relationship with them. And it, you know, female logic. But the crazy part was, you know, she was friends with a female cousin of mine, and there was other females in the room, and it was one other male in the room, and we looked at each other like it made no sense, but all the women understood exactly what she was talking about. So sometimes, man, being able to come into marriages, man, and being able to communicate these things and express these feelings, it could save it, man. So that's just a long way to answer this question, man. Communication be the main problem. Too much bad communication, playing, or get into an argument and say hurtful things. Might even start talking about each other's mothers and fathers and each other kids, you know, out of anger. That's why your son is this. That's why your daughter, you know, that's why your daughter can't get right in school. You know, just hurtful stuff. You know what I'm saying? That's why your mama this it is in your, you know. So they start saying things that they can't take back, man. And this is if the bad verbal communication don't turn physical. Where it doesn't turn physical. You know. And like they say, you know, I'm not going to issue out any rulings or nothing in Islam, or because I don't want to, you know, confuse anybody where they think things where Islam say beat your women or none of that type of stuff, you know, because it doesn't. But you can definitely grab them up, you know, may grab them by both of their arms and be like, you know, grab their shirt or something, you know, yoke them up and just get a hold of them like this and be like, look here. You can do that. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes you got to snap them back and be like, you know, look at it. I'm not advising people to do it. I'm just saying for the people who cross the borderline to physical abuse where they really tussling and throwing hands. No, you got to get a hold of that. You know, you might just want to bring it down to a grab them by their collar and be like, listen to me, you know. But you know, you just got to be careful, man. But communication, man. Silence sometimes kills clarity. Now, sometimes for ourselves, sometimes we need the silence. Sometimes we need to sit down and pay attention and not listen to any other voices and let our internal communication start to speak to us, where we can observe and start to see situations for what they are. You know, I remember, this is a personal thing, and I remember it was a sister that I was in a relationship with, right? This was years ago, many years ago. And I unfortunately, I was Muslim because I became Muslim at 13. So all of my relationships wasn't marriages. You know what I'm saying? So this was one of those situations. And I used to see certain things from this sister, from her sisters, and certain people in her family members. And I literally used to think I could save her from her family. You know what I'm saying? But I ain't gonna say they couldn't process me saying that, but it wasn't something that they accepted well, us having those conversations. And then I remember maybe about 10 years later, when we both grew up and we grew a little bit and we had ran into each other and we was sitting down having a conversation, and they were saying to me like how their life would be different if they had different family members. If certain people wasn't their family members, life would be different from them. But this is like maybe 10, 15 years later. And then I sit back and I say, you remember I used to try to save you from those same family members? But you know what I'm saying? They had try to have conversations with you, but they wasn't received well. But 10, 15, maybe about 16, 17, it may have been longer than that. But when we sat down and they were just talking about how their life would be different had they been related to different people. And I just sat back in my head and said, old Sooner boy, you was trying to do a good thing, man. But this was communication, man. Maybe I should have figured out a different way to communicate that. And then maybe our situation possibly would have been different. You know what I'm saying? I figured out a way to get them to accept and see what I was doing. And then we possibly could have moved in a different direction. But it just led to frustration to where I just was like, her family ain't gonna never let her be happy. And to see 10, 15 years later, 16, 17 years later, and they was talking about things that their family was doing to interfere with their happiness. Applauding the bad situations that they was in, because now she looks like a laughing stock, because she's really not in a good situation. It just looked good, but they applauding it, so she'll stay in it, so they got something to laugh about. And then sit back and be like, you still being stupid, huh? You mean to tell me you still being stupid? This is the type of stuff they saying to her. Communication, man. That's all I'm saying, is in communication, man. They applaud the foolishness and keep her in it, so they can laugh behind her back and over her head. But then the good situations, any situation that could be favorable and work out for her, they interfere. They do little things to make it fall apart, man. But that's one of my own personal situations, man. Communication. Letting the communication process break down and not communicating properly to where they can absorb what I was trying to say to them. But they seen it 10, 15 years later. But I ain't throwing it in their face and be like, remember I used to try to save you for them? I seen it back then. I was trying to get you away from it. I used to tell you I used to tell you. They're going to be our demise. They're going to be our demise. They understand now, though. But anyway, man, communication, man. You're in a good situation, man, y'all keep y'all communication going, man. And just be open and be honest with each other, man. And sometimes, man, we both have to understand, just because you feel some type of way doesn't mean it's right. Like I was having a conversation, man, to get a person to understand feelings, because sometimes when people feelings about something is so strong, they think that's what it is. So I said to them, my next door neighbor, she in her 70s, right? She probably about 75, 76 years old. If I start to really feel that she wants me and she's attracted to me, and my feelings is strong on that don't mean that I'm right. And sometimes people, because they feel some type of way and their feelings is strong about it, they think that's what it is, man. So sometimes people have to have those tough conversations, man, about, okay, I understand this is how you feel, but that don't make it right. Learn how to communicate with one another, man. And like I say, communication and honesty can fix a lot of things, man. I'm telling you, man, I done seen people, like I say, revolving and evolving. I done seen people in that little door in the middle, that revolving door. They just stuck in that revolving door, instead of evolving and moving up based off of one or two conversations that was never had. Communication, man. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.